The hive city never slept. Its breath was the endless sigh of smokestacks and the slow, grinding heartbeat of colossal machines far beneath the streets. Gray ash drifted like dry snow across the rooftops and hung in the air until the lamps turned it into a shifting curtain of amber haze. From the tallest hab towers down to the dripping underways, every wall carried the scent of burnt oil and the distant tang of ozone. To live here was to live inside a furnace that never cooled. Calvus Marrow woke each morning to that furnace. His hab cell was no more than a narrow slot carved from concrete, its ceiling low enough that he could touch it with an upstretched hand. The metal walls were streaked with rust, the single lumen flickering with the irregular pulse of the city's power grid. He kept his few possessions neatly stacked, a battered data slate, a ration tin polished smooth from years of handling, a prayer token stamped with the twin-headed Aquila. Before he spoke a word, before he stretched the stiffness from his back, he reached for the token. "The Emperor protects," he whispered, the words as routine as breathing. The corridors outside were alive with the shuffle of thousands starting their shift. Bare bulbs glowed in a perpetual half-light, and the reek of damp clothing mingled with the metallic scent of the city's veins. Calvus moved with the flow, his robes of a junior adept gathered close, careful not to snag the fraying hem. He passed traders hawking steamed fungus and thin cups of recaf, their voices rising above the dull roar. From somewhere below came the echoing clang of service servitors changing shifts, their hymn-like machine chants barely audible over the rattle of the tram lines. The Hall of Archive. 27 awaited him at the heart of District Aurex. It was an edifice of blackened stone and iron, its towering arches carved with the imperial creed. The doorways gaped like the mouths of sleeping giants, and incense coiled from braziers to mask the ever-present stench of industry. Calvus paused at the threshold, as he did every morning, and pressed his palm to the sigil of the Emperor wrought in brass. A soft hum answered his touch, the machine spirits acknowledging his devotion. Inside, the hall stretched away in endless rows of data vaults. Servo skulls drifted between columns, their single red optics blinking like watchful stars. The air smelled of dust and sacred oils. The only sound was the faint susurration of 1,000 cogitators processing the city's lifeblood of records. Here, amid the hush, Calvus felt a strange kind of peace. Outside the city clamored, but within these walls, every motion followed the order of the Omnissiah. His station lay at a simple desk of beaten steel where a cogitator console flickered with lines of green script. His task was humble, collating shipments of promethium from the lower manufactoria, ensuring the tithes owed to the administratum were logged without error. Hour after hour he cross-checked numbers, adjusting for the inevitable discrepancies of a city so vast that even its own organs often forgot what they carried. It was work that demanded patience more than brilliance. Calvus performed it faithfully, each completing a quiet offering to the Emperor. During the first hours of the shift, he barely spoke. The other adepts worked in their own small orbits, a woman with silver-threaded hair murmuring litanies as she entered figures, a youth whose eyes flicked nervously at every servo skull that passed. They were like small cogs in a machine too immense to imagine. That knowledge might have crushed some, but Calvus found it comforting. The hive was eternal, his life a single line in its endless ledger. When the mid-cycle chime rang, he rose to stretch his legs. Through narrow windows he glimpsed the hive's outer districts, where smog-wreathed spires pierced a blood-orange sky. Flyers streaked like insects between the towers, their contrails catching the dying light. From this height, the city looked almost serene, the smoke blurring its brutal edges. Yet beneath that distant beauty lay the grinding truth. Millions toiled, prayed, and died so that the Imperium's endless war machine might turn. He thought, not for the first time, of the stories told by traveling preachers, tales of distant worlds and heroes whose names resounded across the stars. A flicker of yearning stirred in him, quickly smothered by habit. His place was here. He had neither the courage of soldiers nor the sanction of the priesthood. The emperor required diligence, not glory. Still, when the wind carried the faint toll of the manufactorum bells, he let himself imagine the faraway clang of some great destiny. As the cycle waned, the hall's lumens dimmed to a copper dusk. Calvus sealed his final report and offered a brief prayer of thanks. He gathered his robes and joined the slow procession toward the exit. Outside, night had fallen in the upper hive, but darkness never truly touched the city. Neon sigils blazed from hab blocks, and the streets glimmered with slick reflections. Vendors lit their braziers, smoke curling into the eternal haze. Somewhere deep below, a siren wailed a sound swallowed by the city's ceaseless thrum. Calvus walked the narrow sky bridge toward his hab sector. Far beneath his feet, a storm of lights marked the endless descent into the underhive, a darkness that no sun would ever touch. He felt the weight of it, a gravity older than fear. For a moment he gripped the railing and whispered the emperor's name again, a small spark of faith against the abyss. Then he turned away, unaware of the shadow that would soon lengthen across his ordered life. The next morning began like every other, with the hiss of steam pipes and the distant thunder of forges. Calvus woke before the shift chime, unsettled by a dream he could not recall. The hab block's corridors hummed with their usual pre-dawn murmur, but the voices seemed softer, as if the city itself was holding its breath. He tightened the cinch of his robes and pressed the Aquila pendant to his lips, the ritual bringing no comfort. Archive 27 loomed ahead, black against a sky the color of bruised copper. The great doors stood open, incense smoke curling in sluggish spirals. Calvus stepped inside and at once sensed something wrong. The hush was heavier, the air weighted by a tension he could not name. Servo skulls drifted with their usual silent purpose, yet their optics glowed like watchful coals, and each flicker of red light quickened his pulse. He moved toward his station, noting the absence before he reached it. The desk beside his own sat empty. Scrolls lay neatly stacked, a quill poised above an untouched data slate, as though its keeper had simply stepped away. That desk belonged to Adept Varin, a mild man of middle years whose careful handwriting Calvus often admired. Varin had not missed a day in 5 cycles. His habit was as reliable as the ticking of a chronometer. Calvus slowed, his own hands reluctant to settle over the console. "Has anyone seen Varin?" he asked at last, his voice pitched low. The silver-haired adept 2 rows over did not lift her eyes. A young scribe tightened his grip on a stylus, but said nothing. Only the drone of cogitators answered him, their rhythmic clicks suddenly ominous. He told himself it was nothing, an illness, perhaps, or a late assignment in another hall. Yet, as the morning wore on, the void beside him became a presence of its own. He kept glancing toward it, expecting Varin to shuffle back with an apologetic smile. The silence at that desk grew louder than the whir of servitors or the measured chime of hour bells. During the first break, Calvus ventured down the side corridor toward the records of attendance. A line of adepts waited in uneasy quiet, each avoiding the other's gaze. The clerk behind the grill answered queries with clipped words and no trace of curiosity. When Calvus inquired after Varin, the clerk merely tapped the slate, frowned, and offered a single shake of the head. No explanation, no recorded leave, only absence, stark as a gap in scripture. Returning to his desk, Calvus noticed for the first time the door at the far end of the hall. It belonged to the prefect of archives, a room rarely visited by common adepts. Today, a sigil was affixed to its brass surface, a stylized eye, wreathed by a barbed halo, the Inquisition's mark. The sight halted him mid-step. He had seen the symbol only in devotional texts and propaganda murals, never in the flesh of daily life. Its lines gleamed with a metallic sheen, cold and perfect, a sign that carried both terror and sanctity. For a moment, he could not move. The Emperor's hidden agents, the watchful and the unsparing, did not appear without reason. He forced his eyes away, but the image burned behind his lids. Around him, the other adepts worked with exaggerated care. No one spoke of the seal. No one even glanced toward it. The hall's usual rhythm scrape of quills, faint hum of machines continued, but each sound felt brittle, ready to shatter. When the second cycle bell tolled, Calvus tried to lose himself in figures and manifests, yet his thoughts circled back to Varin's empty chair, to the emblem that gleamed like a silent warning. Once or twice he imagined faint footsteps behind the prefect's door, a low murmur quickly smothered. He could not be sure if he truly heard or only feared. At the end of the shift he lingered, feigning the correction of a data file while the hall emptied. The silver-haired adept left without meeting his eyes. The nervous youth all but fled, robes brushing the floor in haste. Soon only the servo skulls remained, their optics flickering like distant stars. Calvus stared again at the sealed door. The sigil seemed to drink the wan light, its dark halo almost pulsing. He thought of the sermons that spoke of the Inquisition's sacred duty, to root out heresy, mutation, and the hidden corruption of the enemy. They were the Emperor's shadow, striking without warning, answering to no law but his will. To be noticed by them was to invite judgment beyond mortal comprehension. A sudden chill crept through the hall, though no vent stirred. Calvus rubbed his arms and whispered a prayer. He felt as though unseen eyes measured him, weighing every thought for treachery. The Aquila pendant at his chest seemed heavier, the metal biting his skin. When he finally stepped into the corridor, the outer air tasted of burnt metal and rain. The hive's ceaseless noise washed over him, but the tension from the hall clung like smoke. He caught fragments of conversation among passing workers, words clipped short, glances darting toward the archive's towering doors. Rumor moved here like an invisible tide, but tonight it carried no sound. Fear had pressed every tongue to silence. Crossing the sky bridge to his hab sector, Calvus felt the city's weight anew. The underhive's abyss yawned beneath the bridge, and far below, the red glow of furnaces burned like watching eyes. He imagined Varin lost somewhere in that darkness, or perhaps far worse, taken beyond reach by those who served the Emperor's most secret will. The thought chilled him deeper than the wind. At his cell door he paused and looked back. The hive stretched in endless tiers of shadow and fire. Somewhere behind those walls, the Inquisition had stirred. Forces older and darker than the city's smog were moving, and a single absence had become their herald. Calvus whispered the Emperor's name, but the words felt small against the vast, unspoken dread. The hive's night was never truly dark. Veils of smoke rolled between the spires like restless spirits, and the glow of 1,000,000 furnaces turned the low clouds to a dull, rusted gold. Calvus walked through it as though through the breath of some enormous, unseen creature. The bridge, beneath his boots, trembled with the distant pounding of the forges far below. every sound of steam valves hissing, cables whining. The clatter of tram lines seemed sharper tonight, as if the city itself had learned to whisper. The hab blocks rose like black cliffs on either side of the narrow thoroughfares. Rust streaked their walls where acid rain had eaten the paint away, leaving flaking patches that caught the lantern light like old scars. Lifts groaned as they ferried workers between the countless levels, and chains clinked like muted bells. Calvis passed a row of vendor stalls where the night's thin trade had slowed to a wary trickle. The air reeked of fried fungus and burnt oil. Smoke curled from braziers in twisting ribbons that stung his eyes. Children darted between the crowds, faces smudged with soot, their laughter brittle and short. A woman in patched robes bowed over a small shrine built from scrap metal and melted glass. Candles guttered in the breeze, their flames shivering as if they feared the air itself. Calvis slowed, watching her trace the two-headed Aquila across her brow. The Emperor protects. Her lips formed silently. He repeated the words beneath his breath, the prayer a thread of warmth in the chill haze. Incense choked the alleys ahead, pouring from the doorway of a makeshift chapel. Its door was fashioned from an ancient bulkhead, the paint worn smooth by generations of worshippers. Inside, a preacher intoned verses of the Imperial Creed, his voice low and rhythmic, like the slow toll of a great bell. Worshippers knelt shoulder to shoulder on the cracked stone floor, their eyes closed in fervent devotion. The smoke swirled in the flicker of candles, blurring the preacher's outline until he seemed a shadow of living flame. Calvis lingered at the threshold. The scent of incense was heavy, almost cloying, but beneath it lay something sharper. Fear. He felt it in the taut silence between the preacher's words and in the way the congregation clutched their prayer tokens as though they were shields. The Inquisition had left its mark. Even those who had not seen the sigil on the prefect's door must have sensed the disturbance, the sudden gravity that bent every thought toward suspicion. The Inquisition. The very name carried enough weight to silence a crowd. Calvis had grown up on stories of their hidden war, faceless agents who hunted the heretic, the mutant, and the apostate. They served the emperor's will alone, answerable to no governor or cardinal. They could arrive without warning, judge without appeal, and their judgment was final. Some said they moved like shadows through the stars, 1,000 masks hiding a single purpose. Others claimed they were everywhere, listening to every whispered doubt. The truth hardly mattered. The fear was enough. He remembered the seal he had glimpsed that morning, a single letter wreathed in a halo of thorns, and the way it seemed to drink the light. The image lingered like a burn across his thoughts. If the Inquisition had come to the hive, then somewhere in its endless tears, a sin had taken root. To the faithful, that should have been reassurance. Corruption would be cut away before it could fester. Yet Calvis had seen the way his fellow adepts avoided one another's eyes, how even the pious preacher let his voice tremble when he spoke of vigilance. The Inquisition did not only burn the guilty. Sometimes the flames took everyone standing too close. A sudden gust of wind rattled the shrine's candles. Calvis stepped back into the thoroughfare, the smoke of incense clinging to his robes. He felt the city's weight pressing down, the towering hab blocks, the ceaseless clang of machinery, the restless hearts of millions who worked and prayed and feared. Above and below, the hive stretched into shadow without end, and somewhere in that vastness, the Emperor's hidden servants were already watching. He pulled his hood tighter and walked on, each step measured against the echo of unseen eyes. Calvis reached the archive at dawn, though the hive's sky had not changed since night. Ash drifted in slow spirals through the copper light, and the air tasted of cold iron. The vast doors of Archive 27 stood half open, their brass sigils dim beneath a film of soot. He crossed the threshold and felt a shiver run through the stone floor, as though the building itself exhaled. The hall inside lay under a hush thicker than any incense. Cogitators ticked and servo skulls glided, but each sound seemed wrapped in cloth, muffled against the morning. Calvus approached his station and stopped. Upon his console lay a data slate that was not his. Its casing bore no seal of the administratum, only the faint scratch of a quill across its surface. He looked around. The silver-haired adept nearby kept her head bowed, her hands motionless. No one seemed to notice. He lifted the slate. The screen flared to life with a single phrase, scrawled in a hurried hand. The shadow falls first upon the diligent. The words pulsed in a dull, crimson glow. Calvus felt the blood drain from his face. He tapped the surface for more text, but the message vanished, replaced by a blank field of static. He turned the slate over nothing but smooth metal, no mark of sender or origin. He slid it beneath a stack of manifests and forced his breathing to slow. Perhaps some apprentice's crude jest, he told himself, though the thought carried no weight. Varen's absence still hung over the hall like a pall, and the Inquisition seal burned in memory. Was diligence not the very virtue the Emperor demanded? To be warned of danger for faithfulness itself felt like mockery. The hours dragged. Every whisper of parchment, every flicker of servo-skull optics pulled at his nerves. When the mid-cycle bell sounded, he stepped away from his desk, the data slate hidden inside his robes. He walked the corridor where incense lingered from yesterday's rites. The shadows there seemed thicker, bending around the glow globes. A voice hissed from the darkness behind a pillar. "Adept Marrow." He spun, heart hammering. A figure stood half concealed in the gloom. A man or woman, he could not tell. The robes were those of a low scribe, hood drawn deep, hands clasped within the sleeves. "You bear a message," the stranger said, the words scarcely more than breath. Calvus tightened his grip on the hidden slate. "Who are you?" "No time." The figure leaned closer, and he caught a faint scent of ozone and dust. "They have seen you. Before the next cycle ends, you must be gone." "Gone?" His voice cracked. "Gone where?" "Anywhere the smoke hides you. Do not wait for the Emperor's mercy." The hooded head turned sharply, as though listening to some distant signal. "If you stay, you will not draw another honest breath." Calvus reached for the stranger's sleeve, but the figure stepped back, swallowed by shadow. The corridor was empty. Only the slow drip of condensation marked the silence. He stood frozen, the data slate heavy as stone against his ribs. A warning, whispered and written, but from whom? The Inquisition hunted heretics and traitors. To flee their notice was treachery itself. Yet to ignore such a message invited a doom unnamed. When he returned to the hall, the prefect's door stood closed as before, the Inquisition's sigil dull in the dim light. He kept his gaze averted. Each hour that followed stretched thin with unease. Colleagues avoided his eyes, their movements stiff, as though each carried a secret fear. Even the ever-drifting servo skulls seemed to watch him with new intensity, red optics glinting like coals in a dying fire. As the final chime neared, he opened the drawer where the mysterious slate lay concealed. Another line of text now glowed across its surface. "Flight is faith when the hunters wear the Emperor's face." His breath caught. The letters pulsed once, then steadied, the crimson light casting faint reflections across his desk. He glanced around. No one watched, yet the hairs on his neck bristled. He slipped the slate back into his robes, heart pounding. The journey home passed in a haze of smoke and murmurs. In the market tier, workers gathered in tight knots, speaking in low tones that stilled whenever he drew near. A preacher shouted warnings of unseen corruption, his voice cracking against the clang of tram lines. Children darted through the crowd with eyes too wide, their laughter edged with panic. The city, once a furnace of noise, now felt like a living creature holding its breath. Crossing the sky bridge, Calvus paused. Far below, the underhive glimmered like a pit of embers. The air was heavy with the scent of burning oil and the faint, acrid sweetness of incense. He touched the Aquila pendant at his chest, whispering the emperor's name. The words came dry, without the usual comfort. His hab cell awaited, dim and narrow, the single lumen flickering against the walls. He closed the door and leaned against it, listening. Beyond the metal, the city rumbled on, yet inside, all was still. He withdrew the slate and set it on the narrow shelf. The crimson script remained, unwavering. "Who sent this?" he whispered. The slate offered no answer. He lit the small brass lamp beside his cot, its flame wavering in the draught. Shadows stretched long across the walls, bending like silent watchers. He thought Varan vanished without trace, and of the stranger's warning, gone before the next cycle ends. He pictured the Inquisition's sigil, the thorn-wreathed eye, and felt the same cold weight settle in his chest. To flee would mark him as guilty, yet to remain was to invite the hunter's gaze. The dichotomy gnawed at him like a hidden parasite. He imagined the slow opening of the prefect's door, the silent entry of black-robed agents. No charge read aloud, no chance for plea, only the judgment of men who claimed the emperor's voice. Hours passed, measured by the slow gutter of the lamp. Ash drifted through the narrow window, a silent snow that left gray streaks on the sill. He considered seeking counsel from the preacher whose chapel he had visited, but fear stilled his feet. To speak of the Inquisition's interest was itself a risk. Even the most devout might betray him to save themselves. A faint sound interrupted his thoughts, a tap, light as a fingernail on metal. He turned. The lumen above the door flickered once, then steadied. Another tap came from the window's narrow grate. He approached, heart hammering. Beyond the grimy glass, he glimpsed a scrap of parchment wedged in the frame. He pulled it free. 2 words were written in a hurried, slanting hand. Not alone. No signature, no mark of origin. The parchment smelled faintly of incense and machine oil. He stared at it until the letters blurred. Allies or bait? The question coiled in his mind, tightening like a noose. The lamp sputtered and died, leaving the cell in darkness. Calvus felt the city's heartbeat through the floor, slow and inexorable. Somewhere beyond the walls, unseen forces moved with patient certainty. Whether friend or foe, their eyes were upon him. He held the scrap of parchment in one hand, the data slate in the other, and listened to the whispers of the smoke until the false dawn bled once more across the hive. Calvus had not meant to wander so far below his hab tier, but his feet seemed drawn downward, step by step, until the air grew dense with ash and the lamps sputtered like dying stars. The passages here were narrow, their walls wet with condensation, their silence broken only by the distant thrum of engines. He might have turned back had he not heard the voices faint, urgent, echoing through a cracked ventilation grill. Curiosity warred with caution. He pressed close, peering through the rusted mesh. Beyond lay a chamber lit by guttering candles. Shadows of kneeling, figures flickered against the walls, their outlines distorted by the smoke. A shrine had been fashioned from scavenged brass and broken cogitator parts, the aquila hammered into its center, wings bent as though under great weight. Around it, half a dozen cultists whispered in tones thick with fervor. "The Inquisition walks among us," said a woman's voice, raw with conviction. "One has already vanished from the archives. Who among us can claim safety?" A man answered, his head bowed low. "Safety lies only in faith. To doubt is to invite judgment. The throne sees all." "And yet," another voice broke in, trembling, "how do we know whose hand moves in his name? The prefect's door bears the mark, but marks can be forged. Who wears the emperor's face but speaks with another's tongue?" A ripple of unease passed through the gathering. Calvus held his breath. These were words not spoken lightly, nor safely. To question the purity of the Inquisition was perilous heresy. Yet here it was, breathed into the damp air, a spark cast into dry tinder. One of the cultists raised a small book bound in cracked leather. Its pages glowed in the candlelight, covered in ink darkened by time. The Lectitio tells us the emperor's light is unyielding, but it also warns of false prophets, of wolves in sacred raiment. Are we blind to that warning? What if the hunters are not guardians, but snares? The woman hissed softly. "Blasphemy. To doubt them is to doubt him." "Is it doubt?" the man replied, "or vigilance? The creed speaks. The foe wears 1,000 faces, and the most perilous is beloved. What if vigilance demands we question even those who claim his most secret mandate?" Calvus's heart pounded. He had heard such passages in sermons, though rarely emphasized. The faithful spoke of vigilance against Xenos, witches, traitors. But here the same scripture was turned inward, aimed at the emperor's own servants. Was that faith twisted, or faith sharpened? He could not tell. Another cultist leaned forward, the candlelight catching the scars along his cheek. "I have seen the black ships. I have seen them depart with their cargo of souls, weeping, begging. Were they heretics all? Infants, the lame, the broken, gathered as fuel. Tell me that is not the work of wolves cloaked in righteousness." The chamber fell silent, broken only by the gutter of wax. Calvus's mouth went dry. He had heard whispers of the black ships in childhood, tales meant to frighten children into prayer. To hear them spoken of here with such grim certainty chilled him. At last the woman's voice returned, softer now, yet unyielding. "If we falter, we are ash. The throne is eternal. Our task is to endure, not to question." "Endure," murmured another, "but endure as cattle or as servants true. That is the divide." They lowered their heads together, chanting fragments of the creed, their voices weaving between reverence and desperation. The aquila on the shrine gleamed dully in the candlelight, its bent wings seeming almost to writhe. Calvus felt a weight press upon him, as though the chamber's shadows sought to draw him in. The words he overheard rang with both devotion and defiance, and he could not decide which was which. The chant rose, then ebbed, until silence pooled once more. Calvus backed from the grill, his breath ragged. What he had heard clung like smoke, doubt spoken in the language of faith, loyalty twisted into suspicion. In the vast machinery of the Imperium, such thoughts could not be uttered without peril. Yet here, in the hive's forgotten veins, they had taken root. He turned away, the sound of his own footsteps loud in the empty corridor. Above, the city roared on, oblivious. But within its depths, whispers had begun to stir whispers that might yet unmake faith, or reveal it in a darker form. Calvus walked faster, clutching the aquila pendant at his chest, unsure whether it anchored him to truth or dragged him into shadow. Calvus climbed from the underhive passages long after the false dawn had bled across the hive's smoke-stained sky. The climb seemed endless, each stair a rung between two worlds, one of whispered heresy, the other of sanctioned fear. When at last he emerged onto the mid-tier promenade, the air felt thinner, but no cleaner. The lamps burned a pale yellow, struggling against the ever-present haze of furnace smoke. He paused, drawing a long breath, yet the weight inside him did not lift. The images of the secret gathering lingered like scars across his thoughts. The bent-winged Aquila, the fervent eyes of those who prayed and doubted in the same breath. Their words had pierced him, not as rebellion, but as a question too sharp to ignore. The foe wears 1,000 faces, and the most perilous is beloved. He could not forget the man's quiet challenge. Vigilance demanded that even the emperor's hidden servants be questioned. Heresy, the preacher would call it, yet it rang with a logic he could not wholly deny. He reached the archive later than usual. The hall lay in its familiar hush, but today the silence pressed like a weight on his chest. Servo skulls floated in their patient circuits, their optics glowing red as coals. He settled at his desk, hands trembling as he keyed the morning reports. The cogitator's green script scrolled with mechanical calm, but each flicker of light seemed to mock his unease. "The Emperor protects," he whispered inwardly, but the words tasted hollow. As he worked, memories surfaced unbidden. He saw his mother's face as she knelt by a small household shrine, the scent of cheap incense filling their cramped hab room. Her hands, calloused from factory labor, traced the two-headed Aquila with quiet reverence. His father would lead the evening prayers, voice steady as he recited the imperial creed. His light is our shield, his will our law. As a child, Calvus had believed those words were unbreakable, a fortress no darkness could breach. But now the fortress felt like stone turned brittle. He pictured the Inquisition seal upon the prefect's door, the thorn-wreathed eye gleaming with cold authority. Agents of the throne, they were said to be the Emperor's will made flesh. To doubt them was to doubt him. Yet the secret voices in the depths of the hive had spoken of hunters wearing the Emperor's face. The black ships carried away the weeping and the weak. Was such mercy as his parents had prayed for merely a veil for something colder? He pressed his palms to his eyes until stars swam in the darkness. Faith had once been a simple current, flowing without question. Now it was a storm-tossed sea. He feared both shores. To cling blindly to belief was to risk becoming the prey of wolves in holy robes. To turn from it was to cast himself into heresy's abyss. Either path promised judgment. The mid-cycle chime echoed like a knell. He rose and wandered the side corridors, seeking quiet. The chapel annex stood open, a single candle burning before a statue of the Emperor enthroned. Golden paint flaked from the marble, but the stern gaze remained unyielding. Calvus knelt, the Aquila pendant cold against his chest. "Lord of mankind," he whispered, "guide your servant." The words quivered as they left his lips. "Show me the path that is true." The silence that followed was not the silence of comfort. It was vast and impersonal, like the endless void between the stars. The candle's flame wavered, casting long shadows across the Emperor's face. For a moment, the stern features seemed almost to frown. He thought of Varon, vanished without trace, of the stranger who warned him to flee, of the parchment that declared not alone. Were these signs of the Emperor's hidden care, or snares laid by the very enemies the Inquisition claimed to hunt? The questions wound tighter until he could barely breathe. Behind him, footsteps echoed softly, measured. He turned. A fellow adept passed without a glance, robes brushing the stone. Yet in that brief moment, Calvis caught the flicker of a sideways look, a quick assessment before the stranger vanished into another corridor. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was everything. He returned to his desk but could not focus. Lines of data blurred into shifting symbols, as though the machine spirits themselves whispered warnings in code. He clenched his fists until his nails bit flesh. The Emperor protects, he told himself again, but the phrase had become a question rather than an answer. As the cycle waned, he left the archive and descended into the city's restless dusk. The streets teemed with workers spilling from the forges, their faces gray with soot and weariness. Incense smoke drifted from open chapels, its heavy sweetness mixing with the bitter tang of burnt oil. Everywhere he looked, he saw devotion. Mothers guiding children to kneel before makeshift shrines. Old men chanting prayers as if their lives depended on each syllable. And perhaps they did. He remembered his father's warning from years ago. Faith is the Emperor's gift, but also his test. Doubt is the crucible in which true loyalty is forged. At the time, the words seemed comforting. Now they returned as an accusation. Was his own doubt a step toward deeper faith, or the first crack of damnation? He wandered toward the sky bridge, the city's endless tiers spreading beneath like a black ocean lit by furnace glow. Far below, the underhive pulsed with hidden fires. He imagined the secret gathering continuing their whispered debate, candles guttering as they weighed loyalty against conscience. He envied their certainty, even in dissent. A cold wind swept across the bridge, carrying the faint clang of distant bells. Calvis gripped the railing and stared into the abyss. Loyalty to the Imperium had been the axis of his life, the bedrock of his parents' prayers, the reason for every breath. But loyalty, he now understood, was not without cost. It could demand silence in the face of cruelty, obedience to those who wore the Emperor's face, yet perhaps served something else. Was such loyalty worth his life, worth his soul? The wind rose, scattering ash like gray snow. He closed his eyes and whispered the creed, each line a thread he fought to hold. Yet beneath the familiar words, another voice lingered soft, insistent, like the memory of those hidden chants. It spoke no heresy he could name, only a single truth, that faith, untested, is not faith at all. He opened his eyes. The city stretched before him, endless and unyielding. Somewhere within its depths, the Inquisition moved, unseen and unstoppable. Somewhere in his heart, the first fracture of doubt had begun to widen, and he knew it would not be easily mended. The underhive swallowed Calvis like a living thing. He plunged down iron stairwells slick with condensation, through tunnels whose walls wept rust and oil, until the roar of the upper tiers faded to a distant, sullen hum. The air grew thick with the sour reek of chemical runoff and the metallic tang of old blood. Darkness pressed close, broken only by the fitful blue flicker of failing lumen strips. Each step echoed against the stone like a hammer strike, too loud, too revealing. Behind him, somewhere above, boots clanged against metal. The sound carried in the labyrinth's hollow veins a steady rhythm that quickened whenever he slowed. He forced himself onward, breath harsh in the stifling heat. The Aquila pendant at his chest swung like a weight of judgment, clinking softly with each frantic stride. The corridors twisted without pattern, a tangle of forgotten serviceways and half-collapsed conduits. Pipes as thick as a man's torso crawled along the ceilings, dripping black water that stank of machine oil. Here and there, graffiti marked the walls. crude prayers to the Emperor, sigils of long-dead gangs, scrawls warning of territories claimed by shadows. Calvus brushed past them, heart hammering. The hunters, if they remained unseen, yet the cadence of their approach never faltered. A sudden gust of foul air swept through a junction, carrying the hiss of escaping steam. He ducked into the side passage, its mouth half hidden by dangling cables. The floor sloped downward into deeper darkness, the air cooler but rank with mildew. He stumbled on broken grating, catching himself against a wall slick with algae. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning the distant footfalls for a heartbeat. Then they came again, faint but unrelenting. He pressed himself against the wall and listened. The echo of boots rang like the tolling of some vast, invisible bell. Slow, measured, patient. Whoever followed him knew these passages, or had no need to hurry. Calvus clenched the Aquila pendant until the edges bit his palm, the pain a fragile anchor against panic. The tunnel opened into a vast cistern, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of rusted pillars rose from black water, their reflections shivering with the tremor of unseen machinery. A single maintenance platform stretched across the pool, the grating slick with slime. He stepped onto it, each footfall sending ripples across the surface. The sound of boots followed, now closer, their echo carried by the cistern's cavernous walls. Halfway across, he paused. The black water lapped softly against the metal, a whisper beneath the pounding of his heart. He turned, straining to pierce the gloom behind. A faint glimmer of light wavered at the tunnel's mouth, then vanished. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. He waited, breath shallow. Nothing. Only the slow drip of condensation from the pillars above. He forced himself onward. At the far end of the platform, a narrow ladder climbed to a maintenance hatch. The rungs were slick and cold. He gripped them and began to ascend, muscles burning. Below, the water's surface trembled, as though stirred by something unseen. He did not look down. The hatch opened into a low corridor, lined with dormant cogitator banks. Dust lay thick on the consoles, disturbed only by the faint trail of footprints of his own. He moved quickly, his own steps now a counterpoint to the imagined pursuit. Pipes rattled overhead, releasing bursts of steam that wreathed him in ghostly veils. Each hiss sounded like a whispered warning. At a junction, he stopped again. The echo of boots had returned, louder now, unhurried. They were too close. Panic surged, sharp and cold. He darted down the left passage, a narrow throat of darkness lit only by the occasional flicker of a failing lumen. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the scent of rust and old incense. His mind swam with questions. Were these the Inquisition's agents, moving with the Emperor's authority? Or another force altogether, masked by the terror of their name? The memory of the secret gathering's words returned the most, perilous face. He clung to the thought, even as it chilled him. If the hunters wore the Emperor's face, faith alone could not save him. A final turn brought him to a chamber where the ceiling had collapsed, leaving a jagged wound of stone and twisted metal. Moon-pale light spilled through the gap, revealing a tangle of debris. He scrambled across, the rubble shifting beneath his boots. Behind him, the echo of pursuit entered the chamber, no longer distant, but near enough to feel in the bones. Calvus slipped through a gap in the fallen masonry and dropped into a lower service duct. The impact jarred his knees, but he forced himself onward, crawling through the narrow space where the air smelled of rust and damp stone. The duct ended in a grate that opened onto a maintenance shaft plunging into darkness. He crouched, listening. The boots had stopped. Silence stretched, deep and absolute. He held his breath, heart pounding so fiercely he feared it would betray him. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, a faint metallic scrape sounded above a slow drag of metal on stone, like a blade drawn from a sheath. The sound faded, swallowed by the labyrinth. Calvus closed his eyes, gripping the aquila so hard his knuckles ached. Somewhere in the darkness, the hunters waited. He could not see them, yet their presence pressed on him like the weight of the hive itself, vast, unseen, and inescapable. Calvus emerged from the maintenance shaft into a chamber lit by a single lumen that burned with a wan copper glow. The air smelled of cold stone and incense long since burned away. He pressed his back to the wall, letting his eyes adjust. Pipes wound through the ceiling like the roots of some iron tree. Water dripped in slow, steady rhythms that mimicked the beating of a heart. The hush here was deeper than the tunnels behind him, a silence that felt deliberate, as if the hive itself had stepped aside to make room for something far older. A soft footfall broke that silence. Calvus froze. From the shadowed arch opposite, a figure emerged tall, robed in the sober gray of an adept, yet marked by something finer. A silver aquila clasp fastened the cloak at the shoulder, and a thin chain of black iron gleamed at the throat. The face above the collar was pale and composed, the eyes steady as a judge's. The stranger inclined his head in a gesture both courteous and commanding. "Adept Marrow," the man said. His voice was low, almost gentle, carrying a weight that seemed to still the air. "You have taken an unwise path." Calvus's mouth dried. "Who are you?" "Merely an interrogator," the man replied, as though naming a trade of no consequence. "An acolyte in the service of the Holy Ordos. You know of us, of course." The words settled like frost. Calvus had heard the title whispered in sermons and old cautionary tales. Servants of the Inquisition, those who sifted truth from heresy, as a butcher might separate flesh from bone. To stand before such a one was to stand before the Emperor's own shadow. Calvus began, but the interrogator raised a gloved hand, a small, patient motion. "There is no need for an explanation," he said. "Not yet. I only wish to speak." The measured calm of his tone unsettled more than any shouted accusation. Calvus felt the weight of that gaze, as if every unspoken doubt, every private fear lay bare beneath it. "You work diligently," the interrogator continued, "and diligence is a virtue. Yet diligence draws notice, especially when it walks near hidden things. Do you understand?" Calvus swallowed hard. I do not seek hidden things." "No," the man agreed softly, "but hidden things sometimes seek the faithful. A colleague has disappeared. Rumors coil through the halls like smoke. And you," his eyes sharpened, "you have listened." The chamber seemed to constrict around them. Calvus gripped the aquila pendant at his chest, its edges biting into his palm. "I have heard only what others whisper." "Whispers," the interrogator said, as if tasting the word. "They are like embers. One must be careful how one breathes near them." He stepped closer, the movement fluid, almost serene. "The Emperor values loyalty above all. Loyalty is not silence, nor is it blind obedience. It is the strength to endure the test of truth. Do you believe in yourself?" "Yes," Calvus said quickly, the word more plea than affirmation. The interrogator inclined his head slightly, the ghost of a smile flickering. "Good. Yet remember, loyalty is proven when the fire burns hottest. Many claim it. Few survive its cost." Calvus felt the air grow colder, though no draft stirred. The man's eyes, dark as void between stars, seemed to draw him in. "Others," the interrogator said, will tell you that the Inquisition is ruthless, that we strike without mercy or pause. Perhaps they are not wrong. But understand this: mercy is a luxury heresy cannot afford. We prune the garden so that humanity might live. His voice softened until it was scarcely more than breath. It is not cruelty, it is a necessity. Calvis struggled to speak. Why tell me this? Because, the interrogator replied, you stand at the edge of a choice. You will hear many voices, some cloaked in devotion, some in fear. All will claim to know the Emperor's will. But the Emperor speaks in silence. In the moment when you act, he will know whether you are his. The words hung like a blade suspended by a single hair. Calvis felt their weight settle into his bones. The interrogator turned, his cloak whispering across the damp floor. Go back to your duties, Adept Marrow. Continue your prayers. And when the time comes, he glanced over his shoulder, eyes glinting with a light that might have been pity. Remember that the garden must be pruned. Then he was gone, swallowed by the arch's darkness without the sound of retreating steps. Calvis stood alone. The drip of water resumed its slow cadence, marking time like the beat of a distant drum. He drew a shaking breath, the Aquila pendant warm against his skin, though his flesh felt chilled. Was it a warning? An invitation? He could not tell. The interrogator's courtesy had carried a threat more chilling than any blade, the certainty that judgment would come, quiet and inexorable. Whether friend or hunter, the Emperor's servant had left a truth Calvis could not escape when the garden was pruned, all branches trembling. Calvis was led through corridors that smelled of stone dust and ancient incense, each step a slow descent into silence. 2 silent wardens in dark robes guided him. Their faces were hidden behind masks of polished brass, featureless save for narrow eye slits that reflected the lumen globes like fragments of cold fire. He did not struggle. The weight of inevitability pressed against his shoulders more heavily than their hands. The passage narrowed until it ended in a door of black iron, its surface engraved with the thorn-wreathed sigil of the Inquisition. The emblem gleamed faintly, as though lit from within. One warden rapped once, and the door opened soundlessly. Beyond lay a chamber vast and bare, the walls lost in shadow. A single circle of light burned at its center, and within it stood a chair of simple steel. Calvis stepped forward, the echo of his boots swallowed by the darkness. The wardens withdrew without a word, and the door closed behind him with a whisper like the final breath of a dying man. He stood at the circle's edge until a voice, smooth and unhurried, drifted from the shadows. Sit, Adept Marrow. He obeyed. The chair was cold, its metal biting through his robes. The silence that followed stretched taut. Somewhere beyond the light, unseen machinery hummed a low vibration that seemed to thrum through his bones. You have walked paths not meant for your station, the voice said at last. It was the interrogator's, the same gentle cadence he remembered from the underhive. You have heard whispers, seen signs. Tell me, what have you understood? Calvis licked dry lips. I have heard rumors of heresy, of doubt in the Emperor's servants. And you? The interrogator asked. Have you doubted? The question fell like a blade. Calvis gripped the arms of the chair. Memories stirred, his mother's quiet prayers, the secret gatherings' defiant scripture, the interrogator's own words. Loyalty is proven when the fire burns hottest. I have wondered, he admitted, voice barely a whisper. I have feared. Fear is not heresy, the interrogator said. Fear is the mind's alarm when it nears truth. But fear can also lead to treachery. Which has it been for you? Calvus searched for an answer and found none. He thought of the black ships, of Varen's unexplained absence, of the parchment that promised not alone. Were these the seeds of faith or its undoing? His silence stretched until it became its own confession. The interrogator stepped into the circle of light. His gray cloak was unmarked, his face calm, almost kindly, yet the eyes were dark as the void. You stand at a crossing, adept. You may believe this is about you, but it is not. The Emperor's work requires that we test the hearts of men. Some fail, others break and are remade. Calvus forced himself to meet that gaze. And if I fail? Then you are judged, the interrogator replied. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Judgment is neither cruel nor merciful. It is simply the Emperor's will. Calvus felt the Aquila pendant warm against his chest. He remembered his father's words. Doubt is the crucible in which true loyalty is forged. The phrase returned now like a challenge. He drew a slow breath. I am loyal, he said, but I cannot claim to understand all that is done in his name. A faint smile touched the interrogator's lips. That is wisdom, not weakness. He circled the chair once, the sound of his steps barely audible. Some will tell you the Inquisition hunts only the guilty. Others say we strike blindly, that we are wolves in holy robes. Both are true, both are false. The Emperor requires results, not explanations. You have seen the shadow we cast. You have felt its weight. Tell me, adept, after all you have witnessed, do you still hold to the creed? Calvus closed his eyes. Images swam. His mother's candlelit prayers, the secret chants of the hidden cultists, the black ships drifting like silent omens. Faith and doubt braided together until he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. At last he whispered, I hold to him, even when I do not understand those who serve him. The interrogator studied him for a long moment. Perhaps that is enough, he said, and stepped back into the shadows. The circle of light dimmed. The hum of machinery faded until only Calvus's heartbeat remained. The door opened without a sound. He was alone. The corridor beyond the chamber felt colder than before, as though the light he had left behind had sealed itself away. Calvus walked without guidance. The wardens who had brought him were gone. Each footfall echoed along the stone like the memory of a sentence not yet pronounced. The Aquila pendant rested heavy against his chest, its edges sharp enough to draw blood if he pressed too hard. He did not press. The test, whatever it had been, was over, or perhaps only beginning. He climbed through tiers of shadow until the air thickened again with the tang of soot and the stale scent of recycled smoke. The hive's breath came in low mechanical sighs, and the constant tremor of the manufactoria vibrated through the floor. Somewhere in that restless murk, a whisper found him. Adept Marrow. He turned. A man stood at the mouth of a side passage, half lost in the gloom. His robe was the faded black of a scholar, its hem frayed and singed. In one hand he held a lantern hooded with red cloth, its glow dim as a dying ember. His eyes, deep-set and dark, caught the light like polished obsidian. You are followed, the stranger said quietly. Not only by those who wear the Inquisitor's sigil. There are others rivals, perhaps, or those who fear what you have learned. If you wish to live, you must listen. Calvus felt the old instinct to flee, but the man's voice held him like a net. It was neither pleading nor commanding, merely certain. Who are you? Calvus asked. A servant of truth, the man replied. Some call me heretic, others renegade. Words do not change what is. I have studied the Imperium all my life, its history, its silences, its truths hidden beneath the creed. You have seen enough to know the cost of such knowledge. Calvis's throat tightened. Why seek me? Because, the scholar said, the Inquisition has marked you. You stand at a threshold. They will test you until you break or until you serve them. Either way, your life as it was is finished. He lifted the hood from his lantern. The red light spilled across the corridor, revealing a data slate bound in chains of thin copper. Symbols of the old mechanicum were etched into its casing, their edges worn by time. This, the scholar whispered, is a record of truths forbidden to the administratum, truths the Inquisition fears. Calvis stared at the slate, its surface gleaming like a captured star. Why show this to me? Because survival demands a price. You can vanish. There are routes beyond the hive, paths even the black ships cannot trace. I can guide you, but you must help me first. The scholar stepped closer, his lantern's glow touching the steel walls with blood-red light. Within the archive are files sealed by the Ordos. You have access others cannot suspect. Bring me the cipher keys. With them I can unlock what they hide. The record of how many have been taken and why. Calvis's pulse quickened. The request struck like a hammer. To steal from the Inquisition was treason beyond imagining, a crime that no confession could cleanse. Yet the promise of escape flared before him like a distant star. The memory of the interrogator's calm eyes returned eyes that had weighed him without mercy. Was this what survival required? And if I refuse? Calvis asked. The scholar's expression did not change. Then you will remain. You will pray as they watch. And when their purpose is complete, you will either be remade into their image or discarded like the colleague who vanished before you. Do you believe Varen still breathes? The name struck a nerve. Calvis remembered the empty desk, the silence that followed. He felt the weight of the Aquila pendant, the metal suddenly cold. You cannot know what became of him. I know only the pattern, the scholar said. It repeats across worlds. A name erased, a life consumed, and the machine grinds on. You have glimpsed the machinery. Will you feed it or slip its teeth? The lantern's red light flickered across Calvis's face, painting his skin in the color of a wound. He thought of his mother's prayers, his father's solemn voice reciting the creed. His light is our shield, his will is our law. Those words had once been unshakable stone. Now they trembled like the flame of the scholar's lantern. To betray imperial secrets was to risk not only death, but damnation. The emperor's wrath was eternal. The soul that turned from him was lost to the warp's endless hunger. Yet the Inquisition's mercy was no less terrible. He had seen the interrogator's polite smile and heard the quiet threat beneath it. When the garden is pruned, all branches tremble. Survival might mean becoming the very thing he feared. He drew a slow, ragged breath. Why should I trust you? The scholar tilted his head, a faint smile touching his lips. I ask for no trust, only choice. The emperor gave man a mind to weigh truth. Use it. A sound echoed far off, a measured rhythm of boots on metal, steady as a metronome. Both men turned toward the noise. The scholar lowered the lantern's hood, plunging them into shadow. They come, he whispered. I cannot linger. If you decide for freedom, meet me where the smoke from the lower forges touches the sky bridge. You will find a grate marked with the sign of a broken sun. Bring the keys. Bring only yourself. He stepped back into the darkness, his outline swallowed by the hive's endless smoke. The sound of boots grew louder, then softened again as if the labyrinth had hidden them. Calvus stood alone, the Aquila pendant warm against his palm. The red afterimage of the lantern burned in his vision, a wound that would not fade. To follow the scholar was to risk eternal damnation. To refuse was to submit to the Inquisition's slow, silent trial. Survival beckoned like a distant star, but so did the Emperor's judgment. The echo of boots faded, leaving only the low rumble of the hive. He felt the weight of two fates pressing against his heart, each promising loss. In the stillness, he whispered the creed, but the words faltered, unsure whether they were plea or defiance. Night draped the hive in a mantle of smoke and dying embers. Calvus moved like a shadow among shadows, each step measured, each breath a quiet plea. The ruined cathedral loomed ahead, its spires cracked and blackened where firestorms had long ago scoured the stone. Moonlight filtered through broken arches, catching on shards of stained glass that glimmered like frozen drops of blood. The air smelled of old incense and the faint, metallic tang of rusting reliquaries. He slipped through a shattered doorway, the splintered wood creaking under his weight. Inside, the vast nave stretched into darkness. The floor was littered with fragments of statues, marble fingers, and wings scattered like bones of forgotten saints. His own footsteps echoed across the stone, each sound a confession he could not silence. Above, the remnants of a once mighty rose window gaped like an unhealed wound, its tracery framing the bruised sky. A gust of wind stirred the ashes that carpeted the floor. They swirled in slow spirals, whispering across the empty pews. Somewhere deep within the ruin, a soft scrape of metal against stone answered the wind. Calvus froze, breath shallow. The sound came again, deliberate and slow, the measured tread of boots that sought not to hide, but to claim the silence. He moved deeper into the nave, slipping between toppled pillars and the twisted remains of candlestands. The cathedral's vastness swallowed him, every archway and alcove a cavern of shadow. He reached for the Aquila pendant at his chest, its familiar edges grounding him even as his heart beat like a drum. Each inhale carried the scent of damp stone and the faint sweetness of incense long extinguished. The footsteps drew closer, their echo rolling through the ruin like distant thunder. Calvus turned toward the side aisle, where moonlight pooled in broken shafts through the fractured roof. He stepped carefully, the marble floor slick with dew. His breath misted in the chill air, each cloud a fleeting signal to any watcher. A flicker of movement, a shadow sliding across the far wall. He crouched behind the shattered base of a statue, the stone still cold from the night air. From his hiding place, he glimpsed the silhouette of a figure, tall, cloaked, the faint glint of a silver clasp catching the moonlight. The interrogator. His stride was unhurried, his posture a study in calm pursuit. Calvus held his breath. The interrogator paused near the nave's center, head slightly inclined as though listening to the cathedral itself. Then, without a word, he began to move again, straight toward the side aisle. Calvus retreated deeper into the ruin. He passed beneath a row of crumbling arches where faded murals of the Emperor's victories peeled like old skin. The scent of damp earth rose from the cracked floor. Behind him, the echo of boots followed, steady and sure. He reached the transept, where a fallen beam lay across the passage like a broken spear. Beyond it, the apse opened in a pool of moonlight. He climbed over the beam, careful to silence the scrape of his boots. The sound of pursuit never quickened, never faltered. At the heart of the apse stood the remains of the high altar. Its marble surface was split, the relics it once guarded long removed or lost to flame. Calvus pressed his back to the cracked stone and peered around the edge. The interrogator stood at the far end of the transept, a dark silhouette framed by the ruin's pale light. For a heartbeat, he seemed part of the cathedral itself, an unmovable figure of judgment. Calvus Marrow. The interrogator's voice carried across the empty nave, soft yet unyielding. You run, but you cannot hide, not from the truth. The words echoed through the ruin like a litany. Calvus felt them settle into his chest, heavy as a verdict. He forced his breathing to remain steady. The interrogator took a slow step forward, then another, each movement precise, inevitable. The Emperor tests his servants, the voice continued. Flight proves nothing. Only choice reveals the heart. Calvus tightened his grip on the Aquila pendant until pain flared in his palm. The cathedral's silence pressed around him, broken only by the steady rhythm of approaching boots. He thought of the renegade scholar's whispered offer, of the cipher keys hidden in his robe. Two paths lay before him: escape into heresy, or surrender to the Emperor's servants if they truly were. The interrogator paused a dozen paces away, his face hidden by the shadow of a shattered arch. "Will you stand and speak?" he said. "Or will you vanish into the smoke and let others decide what you are?" Moonlight spilled across the cracked altar, glinting off the Aquila at Calvus's chest. He felt the weight of the pendant, the memory of his parents' devotions, the secret chants of the cultists, the scholar's quiet plea. Faith and fear warred in him until he could no longer tell which gave him strength. The interrogator took one more step, the sound ringing like a final chime. "The Emperor is watching," he said. "So are those who would see him undone. Choose." Calvus closed his eyes. The cathedral seemed to hold its breath. His own heart thudded like a hammer against stone. Every echo of his life, prayers whispered, doubts spoken, warnings received, merged into the stillness. His next breath felt like a confession. His next word, if it came, would shape the fate of his soul. From the far end of the nave, a deeper shadow detached itself from the ruin's darkness. The interrogator halted, lowering his head in silent deference. Calvus watched as the figure approached, the echo of each footfall ringing through the broken cathedral like the toll of a distant bell. The newcomer wore no armor of gold or sigils of splendor, only a long coat of unadorned black, its hem streaked with ash. The hood fell back to reveal a face both unremarkable and unforgettable, lined by years, calm as still water, eyes the gray of distant rain. This was no raving zealot, no firebrand preacher. This was judgment wrapped in quiet certainty. The Inquisitor came to stand within the circle of moonlight that spilled from the shattered rose window. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The ruin around them seemed to listen, the faint sigh of the night wind threading through the broken arches like a hymn without words. When the Inquisitor finally spoke, the voice was low and steady, each syllable deliberate. "Adept Marrow, you have walked through smoke and doubt. You have heard whispers, seen the shadows that gather where faith and fear meet. And now you wonder what the Inquisition truly is." Calvus felt the weight of those words settle over him like a cloak. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The Inquisitor's gaze held him without threat, without the cold glint of triumph. "We are not what the stories say," she continued. "We are neither saviors nor tyrants. We are gardeners. We cut away rot so that the garden of mankind might live. Some call that mercy. Others call it cruelty. Both are correct." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, Calvus saw not power, but a weary patience. Mercy is not always gentle. The Emperor's mercy is the protection of a billion souls. To preserve that, 1,000 must sometimes perish. The scales of his will are vast. We weigh not only lives but futures. Do you understand? Calvis's voice returned as a whisper. I want to, but how can slaughter be mercy? Because corruption spreads, she said, her tone neither defensive nor proud. Left unchecked, it devours all. Mercy is to end a lesser pain before it becomes a greater one. That is the burden we carry. We stand where no one wishes to stand, so that others may sleep in the illusion of safety. The interrogator stepped aside, his eyes lowered in silent assent. The Inquisitor moved closer, the moonlight outlining the fine scars at the corner of her mouth marks of battles fought not only with weapons, but with choices. You fear us, she said. You should. Fear reminds the soul of consequence, but fear alone is not our aim. We also serve the Emperor's compassion. We seek not merely to punish, but to preserve. When we burn the heretic, we save the countless who would be lost to his contagion. When we silence the whisperer, we guard the faithful from the lies of the warp. Each act is both mercy and judgment. Do you see the paradox? Calvis thought of his mother's prayers, of the cultist's doubts, of the renegade scholar's lantern flickering red against the hive's smoke. He remembered the scholar's promise of escape, and the interrogator's quiet warning that loyalty is proven in fire. His heart trembled beneath the weight of it all. You test me, he said. But to what end? To reveal you to yourself, the Inquisitor replied. We do not hunt merely for guilt. We hunt for the truth within men's hearts. Some we condemn, others we temper. The Emperor requires both justice and faith cannot be forged without trial. Her voice softened further, almost gentle. You have doubted, you have feared. These are not sins. They are the first steps of true belief. The Emperor does not ask for blind obedience. He asks for faith that survives understanding. The moonlight caught her eyes. In their depths, Calvis saw not zeal but a profound, relentless resolve. He felt the cathedral's silence wrap around them, like a living thing. His own doubts rose and faltered beneath that gaze. What would you have of me? He asked at last. Only this, the Inquisitor said. Remain faithful. Continue your service. Speak the truth when it is costly. And remember that mercy and judgment are not opposites, but two edges of the same blade. She reached out, resting a gloved hand lightly upon his shoulder. The gesture carried no weight of command, only a quiet solidarity. The Emperor watches, adept Mero, and he knows your heart. Then she withdrew, turning toward the broken arch where moonlight spilled like silver rain. The interrogator followed without a word. Their footsteps faded into the vast silence, leaving only the soft rustle of ash across the cathedral floor. Calvis stood alone beneath the shattered rose window. The stars beyond glimmered through the tracery like distant lanterns. He pressed the Aquila pendant to his lips, feeling its familiar bite against his skin. Mercy cloaked in absolute authority, that was the Inquisition's truth, and his trial. He did not know whether to fear or to trust, yet for the first time, his doubt carried the quiet weight of something like faith. The cathedral lay silent long after the Inquisitor's departure, the moonlight paling toward the gray of false dawn. Calvis stood at the center of the nave, the chill of the stone floor seeping through his boots. The Aquila pendant rested heavy against his chest, its edges pressing like a question he could not answer. He felt as if the night itself were holding its breath, waiting for a decision that would outlast the morning. From the shadowed arch came the soft tread of returning steps. The interrogator emerged alone, his cloak gathering the first dim light like a fold of night. He stopped a few paces away, face unreadable. "The Inquisitor has spoken," he said, voice low, each word measured as if weighed before release. "Her judgment is mercy, a choice, not a sentence." Calvus forced his throat to work. "A choice?" "To serve," the interrogator replied, "or to refuse. Service grants life of a kind. You will walk in secrecy, bound to duties that will never be named, carrying burdens no prayer can lighten. Refusal is death. Swift, certain, and final. Both paths are just. The Emperor accepts either, for both are truth." The words settled in the vast ruin like falling ash. Calvus felt their weight press into him, heavier than any chain. To live as the Inquisition's servant was to surrender every fragment of the quiet life he had known. To refuse was to accept the black certainty of death and whatever judgment followed. Survival demanded obedience. Conscience whispered of freedom in the grave. "You ask me to betray myself," he said at last. The interrogator's dark eyes softened, though his tone did not change. "No. We ask you to reveal yourself. The Emperor does not crave slaves. He refines servants. In the crucible of choice, the dross burns away. What remains is truth." Calvus thought of his parents, long dead, their voices rising in the evening prayers. He remembered his mother's calloused fingers tracing the aquila, his father's solemn warning. Doubt is the crucible in which true loyalty is forged. Had this, all along, been the crucible? Was the Emperor's will not in the question itself, but in the struggle to answer? He raised his eyes to the shattered rose window. The stars beyond glimmered like distant watchfires, patient and unblinking. The ruined glass caught their light in fractured colors, as though even brokenness could reflect the heavens. He wondered if faith was like that, imperfect, yet still able to hold the light. "What if I choose death?" he asked. "Then you die," the interrogator said simply, "and the Emperor knows your heart. Your silence will be your final testimony. No torment follows, only the judgment of the throne. We will bear witness and nothing more." Calvus heard no threat in the words, only a solemn truth. He closed his fingers around the aquila pendant, its metal warm from his skin. To die would be to end the doubt, to escape the shadow of the Inquisition and the weight of choices yet to come. But it would also be to abandon the work of life, the chance to serve, to seek, to endure. "And if I serve?" he whispered. The interrogator stepped closer, his voice as calm as the dawn. "Then you will walk a path few dare. You will see darkness that would shatter lesser hearts. You will act in ways that others may call cruel and yet preserve the Imperium. You will pray in secret and some days wonder if your prayers are heard. But you will live, and in living, you will stand between mankind and the abyss." The vision chilled him and stirred him at once. To serve was to carry both the Emperor's light and the burden of his shadow. To refuse was to leave that burden to others and vanish into silence. Calvus closed his eyes. He heard again the cultists' whispered doubts, the scholar's quiet plea for freedom, the Inquisitor's gentle declaration that mercy and judgment share the same blade. Their voices tangled with the prayers of his childhood until he could not tell where one ended and the other began. When he opened his eyes, the first light of morning spilled through the rose window, turning the broken glass to a sudden blaze of gold. The interrogator watched without a word. Calvus lifted the aquila pendant to his lips. He did not speak an answer, for none could capture the weight of the choice. The morning light burned against his eyelids, neither promise nor threat, only the silent witness of the Emperor and the infinite sky. The first true light of morning spilled through the cathedral's shattered rose window, gilding the fractured glass with a radiance it had not known in centuries. Ash stirred on the nave floor, like the remnants of a long-forgotten snowfall, each flake catching the dawn as if reluctant to let it pass. Calvus stood at the heart of the ruin, the Aquila pendant warm in his grasp, and felt the hush of a world both waking and watching. The interrogator waited a short distance away, silent as stone. He offered no command, no signal of urgency, only the steady presence of one who had already spoken all that needed to be said. The choice, Calvus knew, was his alone. He turned his gaze upward. The broken window framed the pale sky, where the faint glow of the hive's upper tiers faded into the immensity of morning. Between the jagged shards of glass, the stars still burned, distant and patient. Their cold light mingled with the newborn sun until it was impossible to tell where night ended and day began. Perhaps, he thought, faith was like that, neither darkness nor light, but the quiet place where both meet. Memories returned like the slow toll of a bell. His mother's whispered prayers over the household shrine, his father's voice carrying the creed through the smoke of their hab cell. The secret gathering deep below the hive, their fervent doubts braided with devotion, the renegade scholar's red lantern and its dangerous invitation, the interrogator's calm, unyielding gaze. Each memory was a fragment of a larger whole, and together they formed something neither certainty nor chaos could name. He felt the weight of the Emperor's Imperium pressing in from every direction, the endless legions who fought and died in the void, the tithe ships that ferried souls to the black ships, the ceaseless machinery of prayer and judgment that bound a billion worlds. Whether he lived or died, that vast edifice would remain. His choice, terrible as it seemed, would ripple no further than the quiet edges of his own soul. The interrogator stepped forward, the sound of his boots soft against the ash. "The dawn comes, Adept Mero," he said, his voice measured, almost gentle. "The Emperor waits for no man's answer, yet he hears all hearts." Calvus met his eyes. There was no triumph there, no hunger for submission, only a stillness that mirrored the sky beyond the broken glass. He understood then that the Inquisition's power was not merely the threat of death or the lure of survival. It was the certainty that the Imperium endured regardless of any single life. To accept the truth was to be both humbled and freed. He raised the Aquila pendant to his lips. The metal tasted of ash and old prayers. Whether his next breath would lead to service or to death no longer seemed the measure of his worth. What mattered was the silence in which he held the choice, and the knowledge that the Emperor, distant, inscrutable, eternal, had already seen the path of his heart. The interrogator inclined his head, as though acknowledging an answer that needed no words. "Then it is enough," he said. The light of morning grew stronger, painting the cracked walls in gold. Dust motes drifted through the air like tiny planets caught in their own slow orbits. Calvus felt the warmth on his face, the gentle weight of time passing. He thought of the scholar's offer of escape, of the cultist's questions, of the Inquisitor's paradox of mercy and authority. All of it, he realized, belonged to the same vast tapestry, a galaxy where faith and fear intertwined like the double-headed eagle itself, each head watching the other for signs of betrayal. The interrogator turned toward the nave's broken doors. "Come," he said softly. "The day begins." Calvus followed. Their footsteps stirred the ash but left no clear trail. Beyond the threshold, the hive's morning roared to life, the deep thrum of forges, the clamor of distant manufactoria, the chant of countless voices greeting the Emperor's day. The sound was both comfort and warning, a reminder that the Imperium's heart beat on, vast and indifferent, whether or not he chose to serve within its shadow. They crossed the sky bridge, where the city stretched into a haze of smoke and light. Towers of iron and stone rose like the bones of some ancient colossus, their heights lost in the glare of the newborn sun. From the depths below came the hiss of steam vents and the muffled toll of the manufactorum bells. The world was unchanged, and yet Calvus felt it differently, as if every sound carried the echo of his silent decision. At the bridge's midpoint, the interrogator halted. He turned to Calvus, his expression unreadable, and placed a gloved hand upon the young adept's shoulder. "Whether you serve or whether you fall, the Emperor's work continues," he said. "This is the truth of our age. The Imperium endures, and we endure within it, each of us a single note in his eternal hymn." Calvus bowed his head. The words did not crush him. They steadied him. In their quiet finality lay a strange solace, the recognition that his life, his doubts, even his fate were part of something vast enough to hold both faith and fear without breaking. The interrogator released him and stepped aside. Calvus moved forward until the rising sun struck his face. The warmth felt both alien and familiar, a touch of life in a city of smoke. He did not know if he would live to serve or die in silence. He did not know whether his heart had chosen loyalty or defiance. But as the dawn spread across the hive and the chants of morning swelled like the tide, he felt the calm of acceptance settle over him. Behind him, the interrogator spoke once more, his voice nearly lost in the growing chorus. "The Emperor knows." Calvus closed his eyes and let the words pass through him like a final blessing. Whether they heralded duty or death, he could not tell. The Imperium would go on, vast and unyielding, its machinery of faith and fear grinding toward futures beyond any man's sight. He was but a single spark in that endless engine, a spark that would flare, fade, and be replaced while the hymn of mankind continued. The morning wind lifted the ash into a slow, spiraling dance. Calvus opened his eyes to the rising light and stepped forward, neither victor nor victim, only a man who had faced the darkness and found within it a silence that belonged to the stars.